I want to ask you about the vice president. There's so many aspects of this administration that I find to be unprecedented, at least in my career in modern times. I've never seen a vice president accumulate so much power so quickly in politics and policy and personnel. I'm wondering if you think about maybe Dick Cheney as the standard of a powerful vice president, where do you rate J.D. Vance in terms of accumulation of power at this early stage?
Well, he'd be right up there. Dick Cheney was quite powerful, and because the president wanted him to be and leaned on him, President Bush, 43, leaned on him for advice and counsel, and he was heavily influential in the field of national security policy, foreign affairs, and so on. Vance seems to have an even broader writ, and I think Trump likes him because he's a really good spokesman. He's a very bright guy, a very talented guy, speaks well. And I remember thinking at a time during the campaign, Mark, when there was a lot of talk about maybe Trump was gonna dump him, and I would see these interviews on the Sunday shows when Vance was out, and he was out a lot, where he would simply run rings around his hosts and make them look ridiculous. And I thought Trump is going to like that and like that a lot. And he did, and he continues to, and that accounts, in my judgment, his effectiveness as a spokesman accounts for his accumulation of influence, and I think it's considerable.
Yeah, I mean, less than a year ago, not only was there talk of Trump dumping him, but when he was picked, people in Trump's circle said to me, "Oh, this is a disaster." He's gone from that to, "I can't find anybody in the party who doesn't like him," enthusiastically right. So. Right. I mean, can you think of any, not just a vice president, but can you think of any politician who's gone from being somewhat unpopular with parts of the party to being universally acclaimed as a great spokesman, a crafty guy, a principled guy? I just don't remember a turnaround in less than a year like that.
No, I can't either, frankly. I think that's a good point, Mark. And I think, he wants very much to succeed Trump. And I think, at the moment, he's got a leg up.
Yeah. I'll talk about Scott Bessent, universally acclaimed as effective in the job of Treasury Secretary. Most people who come in like he did, no government service, time in the private sector, master of the universe, used to getting, his way in the private sector. Most of them have failed. People like John Snow, long forgotten, but one of Bush's Treasury Secretaries. What do you think are the building blocks of Bessent's success so far?
Well, I think, first of all, he's deep. And I think he's very, very smart. And I think he has thought through a lot of these issues before he arrived at the Treasury Department. So he has a lot to say about these things, and he's prepared. And when he's going to do an interview, and he does a lot of them, he comes prepared. And he's quick on his feet, and he's good at explaining relatively complex matters. And he makes the case for Trump and his policies as well as I've heard it made by anybody or by any Treasury Secretary in my memory. I remember when James Baker was Treasury Secretary back in the day, he was effective, but he was not as effective nor as important in that job as Scott Bessent has proved to be.
Wow. So you're saying he's more effective than Baker was?
Well, I think he was a better spokesman, and perhaps that's because he was put out more. Baker was not that. Baker was a guy who was great at talking to reporters off camera.
Yeah,
and he knew how to give you something without hurting his cause. And that's a valuable skill, but that's entirely different from what is the source of Bessent's influence, in my judgment.
If Vance and Bessent are overperformers in this administration, who would you say is an underperformer?
I think Hegseth has had a hard time. I think Pam Bondi has run into trouble because, the question with Pam Bondi, it seems to me, is whether she's lighter than air or whether there's any real depth there. She certainly had a lot of experience in the law, and she's a reasonably competent person. But this is the attorney general. Attorney generals operate at the nexus of law and politics. And it's a very tricky and difficult balance to manage. And, you have to support the president. You have to be for him. But what you don't have to do, and what she does, is recite all his talking points verbatim all the time, which is, I think, what she does. I think it would be reassuring to the public if she seemed a little deeper and more serious.
The president and his supporters say this is like an all-star cabinet, and certainly they're visible. I think it's the most visible cabinet in terms of TV appearances and interviews and press conferences. Do you consider this to be an all-star cabinet or more of a mixed bag?
Well, he's got a lot. They're all out on the field, as you suggest, Mark, and they're very visible. I think that's right. I think some of them are all stars. I think some of them are not. I think Chris Wright at Energy is effective. And I think Doug Burgum has proved to be effective. They've got the president's policy. They believe in it. They can articulate it. And they do a good job. And the White House, which is, to some extent responsible for whether a cabinet secretary is visible or not, has let that be. And who would have thought, Mark, when Trump first became president, it was all Trump all the time for everything.
Exactly.
Cabinet was in the background. Some of them were struggled. That in this new Trump administration, we have a very visible cabinet, and the president is fine with that, which is, I think, an interesting change.
Yep, it's totally different. All right, I'm going to run through some others. You tell me, All Star or Weak Link. Ready?
Yeah,
Transportation Secretary Duffy,
all star,
Homeland Security Nome,
weak link,
Secretary of State Rubio.
all star.
So far, I agree with every one of yours. I bet we'd agree at the route. Head of the National Economic Council, Kevin Hassett.
All star.
White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles.
All star.
It must be all my training, Brit, because I agree with everyone so far. Secretary of Education, McMahon.
Now all star.
All star. So far, we agree on every one. Is there somebody in this administration besides Vance and Rubio who you think someday might be president?
I'd have to think about that, Mark. None comes to mind off the top of my head.
I think Sean Duffy might be president. What do you think of that?
Well, he's an effective politician. He's youthful. A lot will depend on how this plays out in the role that he's been given, and he's head of NASA now too, on top of everything else.
Yes.
So that's an opportunity to shine. We'll see if he can do it.
And do you have any sense of why Trump has changed? As you rightly point out, in the first term, everybody was a supporting player. Now he's got all these folks out there, lots of screen time. I mean, Kristi Noem, I think, might break Regis's record of most live air minutes logged.
Yeah,
any idea why he changed?
Yeah, on top of that, in her case, you get all these commercials that are running with her all over them.
That's right.
I've never seen that before. But, Well, here's what I would say. I think when Trump was first elected, he really didn't really know what he was doing. And in some ways, he has said so. He said when he picked his cabinet, he didn't really know what he knows now. And I think what happened is, this is a guy who has certain insecurities. He's bold, and he's got guts, and he believes in himself. But and you consider what greeted him when he was first elected 4 years ago, and the fact that he didn't know the ways of Washington and so forth. I think he learned a lot in that first term in office, and I think he learned a lot between the time he was defeated and the time he was elected again, and thought about it a lot, and achieved it. And I think the mere achievement of it has had an effect on him psychologically, not to mention his own reaction to being shot. And I think he comes in with a bigger, more comfortable sense of himself, and a better sense of how to pick people and how Washington works and how politics works. And that's enabled him to see the value of having strong people around him, which I think he did in his business. I think he's done that. And he's not afraid to appoint powerful women around him, and has had them throughout his career. And I think all that is coming to the fore now. He's a much more assured, confident, and comfortable figure, and appreciates and wants strong performances around him.
4 years off turned out to be a good thing.